Peterloo, written and directed by auteur-director Leigh, is a film that examines the Peterloo Massacre, a bloody and seminal moment in English history and politics. While Leigh and the film does exactly what a historian should do when exploring a historical event, present all sides, and does that well, Peterloo didn't keep me engaged throughout its 2-hour and 30-minute runtime. Now, I'm usually one of those people who watch historical films and say, it's not accurate enough to the time period, and other annoyances history buffs like me sometimes unfairly push onto the feature filmmaking world. As I said before, Peterloo actually does an amazing job of not only having the right costumes, material culture, and surroundings people of the early 19th century would have had and lived in, but it also really gets into the mind of the working class, the upper class, and the politics of the times, where there were spies, informants, militant police forces, and elaborate orators. From the oppressed weavers and their families to the snobby and often hatefully condescending magistrates and factory owners, Leigh and his actors do a wonderful job of allowing the 21st century audience into the minds of these historical and pseudo-historical figures. Peterloo successfully depicts the genesis and the horrific end result of the working class's struggle for democratic representation for Manchester, which is one of the reasons why I, and perhaps many other people, will think the film boring, and why my mind is kind of torn on Peterloo. There are two sides to the Peterloo coin in my mind. One side is the positive, accurate portrayal of history. The other is the extremely long shots of 19th century daily life, and its language of politics that won't be able to reach a wider audience despite its message being directly applicable to politics today. The majority of the film is set in political meetings, or meetings about those political meetings, whether they be in open or in secret. These meetings are in the language of the 19th century, and mostly in Manchester accents and its dialect, which would take some getting used to for audience members that are not familiar with it. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't be in Mancunian or the language of the 19th century, because that is a sacrifice for accuracy. But if you're also going to market it and show it to a wider audience outside of the UK and Ireland, it should be something the wider audience should be able to understand. In addition to the hard-to-understand at times Mancunian accent and political meetings about meetings, the first 30 minutes alone are just a snooze fest. It was the depiction of the conditions of what the working classes had to work through and live through on a daily basis. While, yes, conditions and pay were horrible, a lot of the shots and scenes were overlong and mundane. I don't need to see someone making pie crust for 3 minutes to understand the poor conditions, or waiting for someone to wake up from a long sleep, which almost made me jealous of that character in that moment. If I were Leigh, which, of course, I'm not, despite of having that pipe dream of becoming a director one day, seeing my name in lights, being proud of the films that I made. Anyway, I would have pushed for this story to be a mini-series, set in the times and politics of today, instead of a feature film following the real events, in order to make it more palatable for a wider audience. One of the main problems of the film, on top of the previous issues, is that at times it is just too convoluted. Leigh writes it as a back-and-forth political discourse between the philosophies of the upper class and the working class, going back and forth physically between the two, and the consequences of each of their actions, which is engaging, but it feels too fast and dips in unengaging territory for a wider audience to completely understand the background before the massacre happens. Through this muddle of language, the wider audience isn't going to understand what Leigh is trying to convey to them, which is a struggle between the working class, who feed the pockets of the rich, despite their lack of low pay and horrible living conditions and working conditions, and have no rights of their own, and can go to jail for pretty much anything. Imagine this. Oh, your pocket watch was taken from you, and the boss engraved it to make it look like his, and you fought back? You go to jail. Oh, you had to go into prostitution because you can't have a roof over your head. You go to jail. Well, actually the largest prison on the planet, Australia. Oh, you can't afford a coat in cold, rainy Manchester, so you take an extra that your employer doesn't want. You, sir, you deserve to be hanged. and the rich upper class that controls everything, and anything that the poor working class do, because the poor working class needs the money just to live. Excuse me. Isn't it ironic that Amazon produced this? Overall, Peterloo does a great job of depicting the times and the people's mindset, but it does not go into enough depth for the audience to fully understand the significance of the people that organized both sides of the historical event of the Peterloo Massacre.